So, assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to our Muslim Women Scholar Series. My name is Zainab, and we at CCMW are delighted to have all of
Zainab, I think you're breaking up.
We'll begin with recitation of Quran in English translation, and then followed by a land acknowledgement. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. In the name of Allah, the most compassionate, most merciful. All praise is for Allah, Lord of all worlds, the most compassionate, most merciful. Master of the day of judgment, you alone we worship and you alone we ask for help. Guide us along the straight path, the path of those you have blessed, not those you're displeased with or those who are astray. So I would like to acknowledge that this land is the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Piton First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. This territory was a subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and Confederacy of the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on this territory. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to any who may be here with us today, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Miigwech. I also want to share that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel and website. We invite your comments and questions, and we'll run a live Q&A session at the end of the seminar using the chat box and Q&A box. And lastly, a post-event survey will be emailed to you later today. It will take about 2 minutes to complete and will help us improve our future programs and events. I'm now going to pass over the mic to our Executive Director, Nuzat, to tell us more about the series and introduce our speaker for tonight.
Thank you, Zainab. Welcome, everyone, to our seminar entitled A Cinema of Resistance, Iranian Women Filmmakers. We have a very exciting program to offer you this evening. Just a little bit about our Muslim Women Scholar Series. So the Canadian Council of Muslim Women, or CCMW, is pleased to present the series. It's one of CCMW's strategic goals to promote critical thinking among Muslims and non-Muslims to challenge stereotypes and assumptions about Islam, Muslim women, and their families. One way of doing this is to feature the work of contemporary Muslim women scholars, focusing on diverse topics related to Muslim women. So it gives me great pleasure now to introduce you to one of those scholars, Zahra Khosroshahi, who is an assistant professor at the University of Glasgow in Film and Television Studies Department. She's currently working on her forthcoming monograph, Iranian Women Filmmakers, A Cinema of Resistance, to be published by Edinburgh University Press. Zahra's research explores how film challenges systems of power and how filmmaking specifically functions as a form of resistance in Iran. I should point out that Zahra is actually Canadian, but she's right now teaching at the university in Glasgow. So we're delighted that she could find time to join us this evening. So let's get started. Zahra, over to you.
Thanks so much. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to just go ahead and share my screen. Just bear with me while I do that. All right, sorry. Actually, let me do it again. No, thanks. There we go. All right. Can I just get a thumbs up that you can see my screen? from someone? All good? Great, thank you. All right, so my talk today is titled A Cinema of
Yes.
Resistance. Thank you so much, Zainab. A Cinema of Resistance, Iranian Women's Filmmaking. And this is from kind of my broader research, but it's my current book project. So I'm so very pleased to be amongst you all, sharing with you my research on Iranian cinema and women's filmmaking, which is very, very close to my heart. And I want to kind of first acknowledge how I've arrived here today, thinking about Iranian women's filmmaking and their resistance, and spend a few minutes reflecting on my own academic journey and how I've arrived here. So of course, inevitably, my own identity as an Iranian-born woman has inspired so much of my work and my research. Today, we are in the midst of a revolution in the making, and we're hearing chants of woman, life, freedom fill the streets of Iran, showing us all the tenacity, resistance, resilience, and defiance of Iranian women who stand face to face against their oppressors. But for so many years, this ongoing fight and resistance of Iranian women have been ignored. And for those of us who are from there or have been following along, we've witnessed and seen the seeds that planted this climactic moment in Iran's current history. I began my studies in humanities as a way to ask bigger questions about the world we're all part of. It was in 2011 when I decided to write on Iranian cinema for my master's dissertation, changing gears from literature to film studies. Asghar Farhadi's A Separation had done so well on the international stage, winning Iran its first ever Oscars. What sparked my interest was the power of the visual medium, the way in which cinema had the ability to travel, but also to touch hearts, to humanize people. But as I delved deeper into my research in Iranian cinema, I realized that despite its recognition on the global stage, as always, women's accounts, contributions, and stories were all still marginalized. In my academic career, it also has become clear to me that when we speak of Iranian cinema, we often speak of films made by men. But the trouble for me didn't end there. I realized also that when we spoke of feminist and women's filmmaking, Iranian, along with other non-Western women, were often sidelined. And so I embarked on this journey through the cinematic and artistic contributions of the women of my country, the women who have had to fight through various and complex systems to make films, to tell their stories, to push the status quo, whose bodies have always been and continue to be a battleground on which the Islamic Republic fights its ideological wars. Storytelling became a lens through which I began to explore resistance, and in thinking about gender politics in my country of birth, Iran, visual narratives functioned as a powerful tool that challenged these systems. But the power of stories was actually taught to me in my adopted country, Canada, a country that has for centuries stolen not just land, but also stories. Cherokee writer and academic Thomas King says that the truth about stories is that's all we are. And I love this line, and it inspired me in 2007 when I came across it. Our stories matter. They become the way in which we hold on to our existence, to our histories, to ourselves. And for so many of us, these stories have been undertold, erased, sidelined, but our resistance and defiance are also deeply connected to our narratives. In my talk today, I share with you my research on Iranian women's filmmaking, what I call a cinema of resistance. In sharing this research, I hope to achieve two main things. First, I hope I can show you why it's so important that we turn to the cinema of Iranian women in this moment in time, why making space for these stories and accounts is so crucial. Second, by turning to the cinema of Iranian women, I invite us all to think about the connections and intersections of our stories and our resistance. I hope this dive into women's cinema can offer a gateway for us all to consider other forms of activism, to think about the power of storytelling, the power of the visual medium, and the importance of feminist and women's activism everywhere. So here we go. I present to you my forthcoming book project, which is entitled Iranian Women Filmmakers, A Cinema of Resistance. The goal today will be to share a very brief overview of the book and to contextualize some of the bigger questions and methods I aim to explore and ask with this project. The connective thread in the book is a theme of resistance, a resistance that takes place both behind the camera as well as within the films themselves. And I turn here to the words of the filmmakers themselves. And I want to start with Rakhshan Banietemad, one of Iran's most prominent and prolific filmmakers. She says, "Cinema isn't my job, cinema is my life. Not that I'm fascinated by cinema per se, rather cinema is a tool that visualizes and brings to the screen my concerns for my society and my country. Art for the sake of art has no meaning to me. Art is a vehicle for raising awareness and producing knowledge, especially in societies like Iran." These lines by Banietemad highlight the importance of cinema as a platform for social change in the country, encapsulating the filmmaker's vision and inspiration behind her work. For Banietemad, artistic and cultural works are like water slowly dripping into a boulder until over time, cracks begin to appear. In a country governed by restrictions and red lines, artistic expressions are meaningful. Films specifically play a key role in creating a distinctive space that confronts the nation's social, gender, and political issues. Banietemad cinema has from its inception been concerned and engaged with the social issues of contemporary Iranian society. Resistance, I would argue, is central to Banietemad's work, employed as a theme within the cinematic frame of her films, but also as a social and political stance that the director herself adopts. In other words, the way resistance plays out is multi-layered and complex, and reflective of both Iran's socio-political context, but also its film industry and the position of women within it. This we see in other filmmakers' works too. For Banietemad, her female characters challenge the patriarchal structures of Iran, and yet these women, despite their conditions, display defiance and agency. So Banietemad's films complicate the role of women in various ways, often engaging with a taboo and always in defiance of the censors. Her approach to cinema then, as a tool and vehicle for social critique and change, is part of her resistance. Making films that stretch the boundaries of censorship imposed by the Islamic regime and choosing to remain in Iran to make films despite strict guidelines are a display of her defiance as an artist, activist, and filmmaker. Banietemad's extensive body of work is fundamental in thinking about the role and representation of women on the post-revolutionary Iranian screen, and has served as my starting point in researching gender and Iranian cinema. But she's not the only one who adopts this language and discourse of resistance. I interviewed documentary filmmaker Shirin Bargnavard, who also works in Iran. I asked her about how resistance plays out in her works. She says, "When we talk about resistance, we're talking about various dimensions, such as cultural, political, and even economical." She goes on that any creative act in societies that are in transition, places like Iran, can be seen as resistance. This is seen at the societal and cultural level, the political level, and of course, economical, because to create, you constantly need to break boundaries and cross red lines. She says, "For me, I really do embody resistance and truly believe that I am resisting at every level to keep true to myself and the art form. So when I am offered an opportunity, it is always important to me who is behind the project, who is funding it, and there have been many times I have had to say no. I'm very careful with who and how I work. This, of course, makes it very difficult because it means fewer projects, less productivity, and less income. It makes it professionally and economically very difficult and requires a whole other level of resistance. But I try my best to carve a path that I believe in and stand by." These lines demonstrate the kind of constraints Bargnavard faces in her filmmaking career in Iran that go beyond just the subject matters that feature in her films. She embodies this resistance, and she pays a price for it too. When Bargnavard comments on her hesitancy to work with certain groups, she's referring to government funding. For her, how she makes the film is as important as what kinds of film she makes. Mania Akbari, who has made films both in Iran and in exile, also spoke to me about resistance and the role of the camera. She says, "I can say that in some ways the camera accompanies me, and this itself plays a role in this act of resistance. I try to document my own performance, my own life experiences. I try to reach a more general audience through the documentation of the personal. Resistance is part of this story, shaped somewhere in this liminal space between myself and my society. In Islamic and patriarchal societies, like the one I grew up in, the woman's body becomes a form of resistance. In fact, it is condemned to resist. through the act of documenting the camera functions for me as my weapon to resist. In these lines, Akbari comments not only on her constraints as a filmmaker, but also on the significance of the filmic form in documenting this resistance. Trans director in exile, Amina Maher, also speaks about her filmmaking. For her, art is the best alternative to revenge. Maher has been extremely vocal about her past as a rape victim. In her work, she claims to break the silence and to challenge a heteronormativity that we see in all cinemas, but especially in Iran's. For her, cinema is the space where her anger is turned into healing, where art replaces revenge. Interviews are integral to my research. The idea of self-representation, voice, agency are central to creating a much-needed space for women's filmmaking practices and process. I want to turn to the words of these filmmakers because I believe their voices need to be part of this book. As well, these interviews allow me to better understand the social and political context for both Iranians inside Iran and those in the diaspora or in exile. But we see resistance not only in the positions or discourse of these filmmakers, but also in their films. In fact, often in a cinema governed by censorship, what cannot be said can be shown. So the filmic text itself has a lot to offer. I want to spend some time now sharing with you some film examples and scenes from a very diverse range of Iranian women filmmakers, those who live in Iran and work in Iran, as well as those in exile. And a question I consider is how can cinema challenge various systems of power? So here we turn to Tuba from Banietemad's Under the Skin of the City, considering how she's framed and politicized. Tuba is one of Banietemad's most central figures, and her cinematic treatment is worth breaking down. Drawn out by Banietemad in 1985, the role of Tuba, the filmmaker's most iconic character, was always reserved for Golab Adine to perform in Under the Skin of the City. However, because of censorship, the film did not receive approval until 16 years later. Tuba, however, appears for the first time in The May Lady in 1999, and then later takes center stage in Under the Skin of the City in 2001. In the director's film Tales in 2014, she appears again. I want to show you a clip, and I'm just going to give you a disclaimer that the quality is a bit low, so there's parts that kind of get repeated, which kind of proves my point about why we need to pay more attention to Iranian cinema and have better versions and subtitled films, because access to Iranian cinema sometimes is really difficult. But I think I'll kind of go over the concepts after, but this is the opening of Under the Skin of the City. And I invite you to think about how the Tuba character is framed, and then I'll go over it. Here we go. Come on. I don't know why it's not working. So let's do it again.
بریم آقا.
زحمت میکشن.
میبخشید خواهر، به نمایندگانی که رأی میدید ازشون چه انتظاری دارید؟
انتظار از
انتخابات مجلس ششم که پیش روی ماست چگونه میبینید؟
اهمیت نقش زنان،
بله.
مشاغلایی که زنان دارن، یا باید به اونها باید توجه بشه به اونها. زنایی که زحمت میکشن.
میبخشید خواهر، به نمایندگانی که رأی میدید ازشون چه انتظاری دارید؟
و انتظار از نمایندگانی که رای میدیم این هست
اجازه
که
بدید ایشون دارن
نمایندگان با خدا باشن، مسکن و بیمه رو بدونن،
خیلی ممنون
بازنشستگی
خیلی
باشه.
ممنون
وای خسته شدم، من نمیتونم بگم، جدی آدم لالمونی میگیره پشتم درگیر. باشه خودت بگو خانم رحمانی، ماشاءالله خود زبون داری، بگو.
I do apologize for the low quality of the film. It is hard to have access to films with subtitles sometimes. But I'll kind of break down this scene. So Under the Skin of the City opens with a close-up shot of Tuba, the character you see on the screen. The shot frames her face as officials interview her about the role of women labor workers in the election that's to come, which of course has political implications. The first image shown on the screen is of a small Sony television, and it is through this that we first encounter Tuba. The image is blurry at first, and as it becomes more focused, the officials signal to Tuba to cover her hair. Tuba fixes her headscarf, pulling it forward and covering the exposed hair. In addition to the double screen, the scarf adds another visual frame to Tuba's face. The cinematic treatment of Tuba marks her as central to the film, but also references the significance of the frame and her relationship with it. By telling Tuba to fix her hijab, the film reinforces the political restrictions of women in Iran, but also functions as a reminder to its audience about the public character of this moment. Not only is film a public forum, but also within the film itself, Tuba's interview will be on national television, which follows even stricter laws around veiling and censorship. While commenting on the social and political policies of the country, Banietemad uses the enforced and compulsory veil to make her own statement. The veiling that has legitimized Tuba's public appearance in this scene has also made her identical to the rest of the women she works with. As she tries to articulate her message, their voices are all muffled together. The message is one that they all share, yet without any fluency or eloquence, they seem unable to articulate anything at all. The black veil simultaneously legitimizes the public voice and conceals the identity of the speaker. Yet there is an additional effect in the identical appearance of the woman. They appear united with a uniform and a shared voice. Through Tuba's embodiment, Under the Skin of the City reveals and unveils aspects of Iranian society traveling across Tehran. This is significant because it dismantles many ideas around space and gender, as well as attitudes towards a female body and its mobility. Not only is Tuba central to the constructed narrative of the film, but also her movement through various spaces is key to the film's exploration of gender and class politics. Tuba's role as a marginalized working mother offers the audience a crucially significant vantage point. In addition, it is an illiterate working class woman to whom Banietemad grants this position. The importance of this lies in the depiction of Tuba as a key figure in the director's body of work, but also her centrality to the narrative. Tuba is a driving force, the glue, and the vocal character that functions as a visible and filmic reminder for an audience year after year. She is, I argue, a product and reproduction of Banietemad's resistance as a filmmaker. The way in which the story is constructed is significant to her relevancy. Through her mobility and movement to and from various spaces, Banietemad relies on Tuba as a way to unpack the city. But also, it's important to note that in a cinema that works hard to marginalize women characters, the Tuba figure comes to represent resistance. What is more, Banietemad's illiterate female protagonist, against her will, has to adopt a political discourse as a way to survive and make sense of her pain and struggles in Tehran. This demonstrates how entrenched the personal and political are, and Tuba shows us how they can never be divorced from one another. In fact, Banietemad uses Tuba's body to make political statements, connecting the personal with the public. Returning to the opening scene, the officials ask Tuba to fix her headscarf. This telling moment comments on the arbitrariness of the situation. These women are here to discuss their role in the workforce as a way to bring forth change, yet all that matters, interrupting Tuba as she introduces herself, is the form of her hijab. Banietemad here alludes to the petty politics of her country that is far more concerned with women's dress than with the workers' rights. While doing so, Banietemad indirectly confronts the idea of compulsory veiling. And now I want to turn to the final scene of the same film, Under the Skin of the City, where once again we are confronted with Tuba. And I'm hoping that this clip plays a bit better.
پیام چه پیامی آقای جون؟ همینقدر میدونم که یه وقتی از هرچی نالیدیم گفتیم جنگ الان وقتش نیست. ما هم دیدیم راست میگین گفتیم چشم. بعدش هم که جنگ تموم شد گفتیم کلی خرابی بار اومده اینقدر نق نزنین. باز دندون سر جیگر گذاشتیم. بعدم یکی پیدا شد میخواد به داد ما برسه. حالا من اومدم رای بدم پای صندوق ببینم
مادر میبخشی ضبط ما اشکال پیدا کرده. اگه میشه دوباره تکرار کنیم.
بکن آقا جون خدا ننه بابا تو بیامرزه. اونم رفت بچم آواره شد. این روزام که هر جا میری یکی فرت داره فیلم برمیداره. کاش یکی پیدا میشد از این تو عکس میگرفت. از این تو. اصلا این فیلم ها رو به کی نشون میدی؟
So Under the Skin of the City ends as it begins with Tuba in focus, the camera facing her. In the film's final scene, as she's shown participating in the elections. This time, however, as she's interviewed, Tuba is much more prepared. In this final scene, she's not reciting and repeating what she's been told. And when asked about her message, Tuba responds, message, what message? But then Tuba is asked to repeat herself because of technical difficulties. And this time, Tuba's real message is delivered. Her message is loud and clear. Just forget about it. I lost my house, my son ran away, and people are filming all the time. I wish someone would come and film what's happening here. Tuba points to her heart. The film ends with Tuba's iconic question, who the hell do you show these films to anyway? Here, Tuba's body, language, nor tone can be contained. Her hair pokes out. She's there to vote, her message crystal clear. So while the film returns to her, we witness her progression too. And most importantly, in this scene, Tuba embodies resistance. She also asks her famous question, the same question she asked in The May Lady, and the same question she goes on to ask in Tales. Who the hell do you show these films to anyway? Always drawing our attention to the filmic medium. Tuba's repeated question draws our attention to the importance of cinema, but also makes us think about audiences. Who watches these films? This is a fictional film, but in always commenting on the camera, Banietemad, the filmmaker, shows us how engaged she is with cinema itself, as a form, as a medium, and as a tool. Diasporic visual artist and filmmaker Shirin Nishad is also interested in the functionality and importance of the camera. In her Woman of Allah series, she also turns to her body, using it almost as a canvas to draw upon it in her mother tongue Persian. In an article, Nawab argues that Nishad is fully aware that she's pictured alongside symbols of Iran. She goes on to say that through the camera, Nishad is trying to relocate her place and her voice in that new place between a symbolic Iran and the West, while remaining ambivalent about being fixed in place by either. Nishad uses not just her camera, but relies very much on her own body to claim the space of in-betweenness. In her fictional work, such as her feature film Women Without Men, Nishad also turns to women's bodies. In a critical scene, the Zahrian character, a prostitute, is shown in a bathhouse, rigorously and violently cleansing her body until it bleeds. As many scholars such as Nafisi and Fitcherman Lewis have argued, the woman's body often functions as a stage on which male brutality is played out. Yet, even with this scene alone, we can see that the body also becomes the object through which these women claim their own bodies, writing on it and rewriting the body, traveling through it, as well as cleansing it. In feminist and LGBTI plus activism, the authors argue that the body can appear both as an object of social control and as a site of agency that draws on the dual function of the body as well as its inability to incite collective practices. This we witness in Iranian women's cinema too, where the individual body is used as a way to explore collectivity, but also as a site of agency and control. One of the best examples of this is Mania Akbari's works, a filmmaker in exile living in London who has for decades turned to her own body to reflect on her country and experiences with war and breast cancer. In her film A Moon for My Father, the idea of bodies as sites of oppression and resistance reaches its climax. The opening and closing shot of Akbari herself with two different bodies, shelters for her soul, as she declares in the film, stand out. She finds a different home, both in her body and in an exile. In a nutshell, this is a film about Akbari's journey in recovering from breast cancer. By the end of the film, we see, against all odds, that she's able to give birth. The film also documents her undergoing surgery and the remaking of her body. This film, I argue, is far from being a personal account of Akbari's life. Akbari's body becomes a symbolic and visual reminder of the nation, and her story, her loss, as well as her triumph, leave the audience with a sense of hope. From the trailer alone, we can see images of bodies, sculptures, merged together with religious and patriotic chants and the sounds of war. In fact, the very notion of the body in film is intertwined with images of war, homeland, oppression, memory, sickness, and abuse. But there are also images of resistance, hope, and survival. By the end of the film, Akbari's body has overcome so much in the ultimate form of miraculous resistance as she breastfeeds her little boy. The film is bookended with Akbari's body. It begins and ends with her body, with a double camera, hers and the medical camera that examines her body. It begins with the one on the left, the top image on the screen, but Akbari uses her body to tell a bigger story, to make larger connections, all the while offering a meditation on women's bodies and experiences of pain and loss. What Akbari brings into the scene is truly confronting, moving, and most certainly political. In this opening scene, we see her body as well as her scars. In the closing of the film, Akbari's body is different. This is the image below that. She has made, in her words, a new shelter for her soul. And even though we learn and see that her body has endured so much, in this final scene, it is her survival that really stands out. But no matter how personal this journey may be for Akbari, her film always makes connections to the political. Throughout the film, she shows how her personal fight with breast cancer has come to stand for something bigger, taking us back to the long years of war, pain, death, and visually taking us to the current resistance displayed by her fellow Iranian women on the streets of today's Tehran. And this is the image that I'm talking to. So this is the image on the right. So as you see on the slide, this is Akbari post-surgery as she's showering and healing. And even here, her body reminds her of the country she's been forced to leave behind. She says here, "I've lived most of my life in Iran, where the female body is a source of guilt and is constantly censored." But her message and the connection between her home and her body go even further in the film. This is an image of a woman in Tehran, Iran from 2017, used in Akbari's film too. The woman stands on a podium to protest and object compulsory veiling. And she waves a headscarf as she fights for her right to choose. Today, her and so many like her are in prison. Here, Akbari shows that she cannot think about and conceptualize her body without the collective body of women in Iran. She says in the film, I feel I am them and they are me, connecting herself and her body back to the nations. And visually, Akbari goes on to edit her own pregnant and naked body onto the podium, at once shattering the enforced modesty codes of the Islamic Republic and rejecting its notion of collectivity and nationhood. By merging her body with these women and her story with theirs, she claims a spot, a place in this ongoing resistance, and even in her exile, imagines her body as part of Iran's women's movement. Iranian women's resistance shows up in various ways in cinema. My research is interested in the ways in which women turn to their bodies, to their experiences, and recollections of war and the revolution to claim a spot. One of the most interesting ways Iranian filmmakers have managed to negotiate with censorship codes post-revolution is through the child figure, and I'm going to turn to that for the remainder of the talk. So many scholars have viewed the child figure as an important symbol for the nation, and in their book, Nation, Film, and Child, the authors discuss how the idea of the child is without doubt a potent symbol for the nation, for the ethno-national group, and for those who wish to either defend or to abjure national histories and collective memories alike. Within post-revolutionary Iranian cinema, the child figure serves as a tactical function, allowing filmmakers to bypass censorship even. The child functions as an allegory for something larger. Since the Islamic Republic, because of censorship, many filmmakers have had to turn to the child figure as a way to explore larger social and political issues. Post-revolutionary Iranian filmmakers have often built their screen worlds through the perspective of the child. In fact, the strict laws of the Islamic Republic have made it desirable for artists to turn to the child figure as a strategy to negotiate with censorship. The child's innocence allows them to navigate spaces, even functioning as a mediator and symbol for social and political change without necessarily compromising the position of the filmmaker. But films by women filmmakers such as Persepolis, The Apple, or Hush, Girls Don't Scream don't only center the child figure, they turn specifically to girlhood, to explore the complex social and political issues of contemporary Iran and its intersections with gender. The cinematic worlds of these films is constructed through the child's gaze and experiences, lending it a sense of universality, but it is the unique experience of girlhood that facilitates a deeper exploration of Iran's cultural specificities, such as war and revolution. Whereas childhood is intended to offer a universal lens, through the girl figure, these films move towards something far more local, and in doing so, they challenge the neutrality of the child. So let's start with an Iranian girl familiar to most of us, Marji, from Marjan Satrapi's memoir, Persepolis. If you've read the graphic novel or watched the film, these images on the screen may be familiar to you. This is Marji as she screams down with the Shah, chanting, active and ready as a young girl to challenge her country's state affairs. But as Marji grows into her girlhood, her resistance becomes more tangible, more real, more political, its consequences greater. Perhaps we recall the scene when she's on the streets of Tehran trying to buy illegal and bootleg CDs to her favorite rock band in a country and at a time when music was banned. And I'm just going to show you the clip.
Maman, il faut absolument que tu me donnes 50 tomates.
Ah oui, mais pourquoi faire?
Golnaz m'a dit qu'il y a des mecs qui vendent des cassettes sur l'avenue Gandhi.
Et tes cassettes des Bee Gees?
Mais maman, c'est nul, les Bee Gees, quoi.
Stevie Wonder,
Julio Iglesias,
Pink Floyd, Michael Jackson,
Roger Lève, Vernet à ongles, carte à jouer.
Iron Maiden,
Eh, c'est combien pour ça?
100 tomates,
50.
60,
50.
60,
50.
50.
Et toi, c'est quoi cette tenue?
C'est quoi ces chaussures de punk?
Quelles chaussures de punk?
Ça là.
Mais c'est des baskets.
Cette forme, c'est punk.
C'est parce que je fais du basket au club de mon école.
Et cette veste, c'est pour faire du basket aussi.
Ça, qu'est-ce que c'est? Michael Jackson?
Ce symbole de la décadence occidentale.
Mais pas du tout, madame. C'est Malcolm X.
Tu te fous de moi? C'est Michael Jackson.
Baisse ton foulard, petite pute.
Allez, ça suffit. Tu viens avec nous au comité.
Pardon, madame, je recommencerai plus. Madame, ma mère est morte. C'est ma méchante belle-mère qui s'occupe de moi. Si je rentre pas tout de suite à la maison, elle me tuera. Elle me brûlera pour faire repasser. Elle obligera mon père à me mettre dans une orphelinat. Pitié, pitié, madame, pitié, pitié. Pitié, ayez pitié, madame. Ouf.
I'm the master of the monsters.
So once caught, Marji resorts to lying. She engages in an over-the-top performance that guarantees her escape from the authorities. In a scene that is humorous, Satrapi shows us not only the arbitrariness of the Islamic Republic's laws, but also the tactics, negotiations that people and young girls must very quickly equip themselves with to ensure their survival and navigation through the system. Girlhood in Iran isn't always humorous, and Satrapi shows us that too. We see Marji pick a fight with God when her favorite uncle Anush is executed. We also see her recollection of the war, her engagement with authorities, and so on. But there's often a strong sense of defiance I find in the girls I watch in these stories, and these filmmakers turn to girlhood as a way to expose that, but also to offer possibilities. While childhood is seen as allegorical for the nation, I don't think girlhood in any of these films symbolizes the nation. I think they instead offer a space for imagining new possibilities for the nation via girlhood. Possibilities we have perhaps begun to see today across Iran. And this is an image that kind of comes to my mind with this idea of girlhood and resistance. In another film called Hush Girls Don't Scream, made and screened in Iran by Puran Darkhshande, girlhood is centered again. Hush captures the suffocation of its main female protagonist, Shirin, a victim silenced by her traumatic childhood experience of pedophilia and rape. The film shows the entrenched cultural ideals of Iran's legal institutions, but also sheds light on even more complex social issues such as familiar relationships and cultural attitudes towards rape and shame. Through its intersection of law and custom, the film shows us Shirin's inevitable entrapment between the two. And the images I show, I just want to just offer a trigger warning. I'm not going to show a clip, but the images are disturbing, and they kind of show rape, not in an explicit way, but they do communicate that. So Hush begins with a wedding scene, Shirin's, but as we wait for the bride to enter, we are horrified by her state, her white dress tainted with blood. Soon after, knowing Shirin has committed a crime, but one not yet disclosed, we see her in court and in prison in a black chador, a black veil. She's in a state of shock, her lawyers pleading with her to break her silence. So this is her after. The first time we hear Shirin tell her story is through a flashback where she finally breaks her silence, the camera drawing closer to her face, zooming in. She's in complete focus, her face framed by both the camera and her black veil. Tears stream down her face as she stutters, "I was only 8. Shirin's inability to vocalize her story represents the pain and burden she's had to carry with her since being a little girl. And this is the image where she stutters. As she says these words, the sound of a child playing can be heard in the background. There's a sudden and stark change in the color of the shot. First, we see the camera focused on Shirin, dressed in all black clothing. The next shot is of her parents and her mother's bridal shop, surrounded by white wedding dresses. Shirin wears a white dress with a wedding veil, playfully running around. The image is of an innocent young girl as a camera follows her. She playfully hides from her mother when she calls her. The camera, however, remains still once it reaches Murad, their driver. In this moment, Shirin walks out of the screen, the camera still focused on the Murad character. What is striking in this scene, in addition to what the white and black represent, is the image of a child bride, suggesting loss of innocence, which soon plays out in the film. The image is especially vivid when Murad takes her hand, and as the two walk out the door together, Shirin still wearing her bridal veil. In a later scene, Murad and her engage in a game, Murad chasing Shirin, and she's on the couch when he starts to tickle her. In this sequence, all you see are Murad's adult hands and Shirin's face and shoulders as she laughs loudly. Soon her laughing face changes, and the music changes and intensifies, and the editing pace quickens. And while the camera never explicitly shows or displays rape, it is fully clear and understood what has taken place. And these are the images that we see on the screen. So nothing is shown explicitly, but we see through the editing exactly what has taken place. We are then back in court with Shirin, the film depending on these flashbacks as its mode of storytelling. What cannot be expressed verbally is visually depicted. What language limits, memory enables. Shirin's traumatic childhood experience is shown to us through these flashbacks. The restraints and limits of language is also present outside of the narrative. Due to censorship regulations, what cannot be expressed or shown in an Iranian film is visually and symbolically implied. Through editing and the images on screen, Rakhshan makes sense of the gaps between the shots, generating meaning and telling a story. Even in the court of law, when the word rape is uttered, it is whispered. However, there remains no doubt or confusion as to what happens between Murad and Shirin. But similar to Shirin's silence, the film too must find a different mode of telling. The film's form remains crucial to our understanding of the complexities and discourse around rape, honor, and shame, and girlhood becomes the way in which these topics are expressed and explored. By the end of the film, we learn of Shirin's crime. On her wedding day, she hears the screams of a little girl, screams that remind her of hers, and she turns to her rescue, attacking and killing the girl's abuser. Captured through its very name, Hush, Girls Don't Scream touches on the systemic and cultural silencing of girls. It exposes the discourse of shame and guilt taught to girls from a young age. In the film's ending, Shirin is charged with murder and sentenced to execution, also reflective of the Islamic Republic's policies. But as she walks her final steps, Shirin not only speaks out, but she screams, as you see in this image. Puran Rakhshan frames Shirin's act of crime as a preservation of girls that follow her. It functions as a political martyrdom for Shirin in the hopes of breaking the silence and the cycle. And I will end it here. Thank you. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Zahra, for that excellent presentation. I think all of us, it's safe to say, learned a lot about the filmmakers and how they use these voices of resistance and dissent. So thank you so much for this. I'm going to pass the baton over to Nina for her closing remarks.
Thank you, Sabrine. And thank you so much, Zahra. Your current book project is fascinating, and we look forward to hearing about when it is on the shelves so we can all purchase it. The artists you highlighted are brave and principled, and their work raises awareness and increases our knowledge about the life of women in Iran. We pray for a regime change in Iran and for honorable leaders who care for all the people of Iran. May God bless you, Zahra. We pray that He continues to give you strength and patience to highlight these amazing filmmakers and spread their message widely. And finally, many thanks to our team at CCMW, Nushat, Zainab, Sabrine, Iman, and Firdaus. They've been very supportive and helped bring this webinar together. And most of all, thanks to all of you who tuned in tonight, who joined us. We appreciate your friendship and support. We're so happy to see old friends and some new ones too. Please keep in touch with the Canadian Council of Muslim Women. Follow us on our website and our social media posts for upcoming events and projects. And until next time, inshallah, we'll be with Zahra again. Take care and assalamu alaikum.